fundamental rights are on the ballot. Truth and facts and logic and reason and basic decency are on the ballot. Democracy itself is on the ballot. The stakes are high.
I was told that democracy would be dead if Republicans won too many of the elections this last Tuesday. Well, they did, actually. They won enough to get a majority in the House, as slim as it may be. And it looks like they might be lining up for a majority in the Senate. So is democracy dead, or has it been resuscitated at the last minute because Democrats won Pennsylvania or something? Hard to get a handle on the death of democracy. Maybe David Harsanyi at The Federalist will be able to help me out here. In fact, your article, I believe, says democracy is dead, long live democracy. I guess that says it all.
Yeah, I mean, the meaning of the word democracy has been so, wrung of any meaning that, anything that you support that Democrats don't support, they believe is an attack on democracy. And it's become such a lazy rhetorical device that it doesn't mean anything. So I hope that kind of democracy is over and a new kind of democracy has emerged, which is gridlock, which is actually having to deal with an opposition party, which is having to debate rather than simply smear your opponents constantly. I doubt it's going to happen, but I hope so, at least that last.
Well, what's ironic is, no, we're not a democracy, but we use the democratic process to choose our representatives for our constitutional republic that has a nice separation of powers. And what you just laid out there, where you've got not just one party ruling everything, and you've got a healthy debate of two interested powers with shared constitutional powers, that's exactly what our founders envisioned. This is what they want, isn't it?
I think so. I think this is gridlock right now is the organic state of the American government, meaning that it represents the people correctly. There, we have many issues that we can't compromise on, and we won't compromise on. So the government should be doing very little. The states should be doing far more. But rather than look at it that way, Democrats want a slim majority to basically lord over the decisions of everyone, to pass generational reforms through without any input or consensus from the other party or the nation. And that's not how American democracy works. So while they were trying to centralize government with such a small majority, what is far better would be to have both parties have a voice. Now you can either compromise or you don't, right? But at least then states can take up these issues and work on their own problems.
By the way, David, you note in your article that this is actually the argument Elon Musk made before the election that he was much criticized for. He said, listen, I voted Democrat my whole life, but it's better to have a healthy opposition so you can work things out and you don't have one party rule that's unchecked. The fact that he comes from South Africa, by the way, which has a notoriously splintered and fractured parliamentary system, I think lends even more credence to that argument.
Yeah, to me, those kinds of parliamentary systems like you see in Israel are actually far too democratic, and it allows minorities to shape policy too much, right? I much prefer this kind of federalist system. I think that it is the only kind of system that works when you have such a diverse population, when you have so many different regional problems and different ideas about how to live life. That is actual diversity. That helps foster that diversity and let different sorts of people live with different sorts of ideas. Whereas, people who want to centralize government, who want to, get rid of the electoral college, who want to get rid of the filibuster, things like that, they are for democracy, but a kind of democracy that the founders didn't want to have any part of.
Well, and of course, here's the irony, David. You just listed off exactly what Democrats would do should they retain power or expand their representation in the House and the Senate. And those things, I mean, they're constantly saying, this is going to be the end of our democracy. Those things actually would be the end of the way our government has functioned for so long in such a stable way.
Well, I know this is blasphemy to say, but I'm not a particularly big fan of democracy. I don't think that two people should be allowed to tell one person what to do, especially when they're undermining their inalienable God-given rights, right? So that's often what they want to do, which is on top of the things I just mentioned and what you mentioned, they also want to delegitimize the Supreme Court, which is a counter-majoritarian, buffer against that kind of democratic,
Oh, yeah. I mean, David, the creation of the Supreme Court and their function, as well as, by the way, the creation of the Electoral College, is rooted in minority rights and minority representation. Their version of democracy, as you spell out in your excellent column, as always, at The Federalist, their version of democracy requires one-party rule and almost dictatorial powers. That's democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. They're not very consistent, because when the Supreme Court hands back an issue that is nowhere in the Constitution, like abortion, and says, figure it out yourself, in the democratic process, suddenly that's also anti-democracy. So you really can't win with them. I mean, basically just getting their way is how they see and think democracy works.
You do talk about gridlock quite a bit, and let's face it, we're probably going to have a couple of years of gridlock. I'll never forget my dad when I was still being formed as a young conservative during the Reagan years. There was a lot of talk in the media about how there was gridlock and they weren't getting anything done and nothing was advancing. And I remember my dad talking back to the television saying, Good. I don't want Washington to do anything. Whenever they do something, it ends up hurting me." That's actually pretty true, isn't it?
Yeah, he laid out my entire philosophy of politics. I mean, I don't think they should be doing much. Most of the time when they are doing something in D.C., they're overstepping their constitutional duties and charge. So I think limiting them is a very good thing, and they shouldn't be doing as much as they do. It's none of their business most of the time to be doing the things they do. And when when Democrats had full control, as they do for the past 2 years, they wanted to not only cram through $5 trillion reforms of the system that would go on forever, right? That's not very democratic. But also they wanted to take over the elections. They wanted to federalize elections, which is also unconstitutional. And they wanted to do that as another way to control, of course, votes, but also to streamline and make democracy far more direct than the founders.
Yeah, that said, David, I mean, we are going to have a bit of a fractured situation coming up here that might be harder for the Republicans to handle. Should the runoff in Georgia end up with the Republicans getting a one-seat majority, and whatever majority that Republicans have in the House, it's going to be a slim one. In a strange way, we're almost looking, at least within the Republican caucus, we're looking at that same sort of fractured, splintered parliamentarian view that we were just decrying in other countries, where very few people, a caucus of 15 could be the difference maker for legislation. Is that something to worry about?
Yes. I mean, I think two things happen when you have gridlock that aren't very good. You have the president frustrated, becomes more, starts to abuse executive power. That's the way he can. That's the only way he can do anything. So he does. That happened with Obama quite a bit. Occasionally happened with Trump as well in ways I didn't like. But certainly one of the most abusive presidents in that way is Joe Biden so far already, and he had control of both houses. Yeah. And the second thing is what you mentioned. I mean, you get sort of this block of moderates who then basically control government. And they get to do whatever they want. And then that small block is the one who's dealing with the president, who's compromising and things like that. And usually it works out pretty well for Democrats, frankly. But so I worry about that. But I think that honestly, though, it's not like it has been in the past. Most senators are far more partisan, I think, in the sense of how they vote than they used to be. Since Obamacare, I think that blew everything up. There's still a few senators who are pretty moderate, but most of them are far less inclined to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think you're right. And certainly based on the president's remarks yesterday, this is no Bill Clinton stepping to the floor of the House saying the era of big government is over. This is an emboldened president, and I guess we should expect more executive actions down the line.
I think so. Yeah, he's going to undercompensate, I think, for this victory. Yeah.
Right, undercompensate. But the good news is, David, now we're in the middle of the presidential election for 2024, so we could all start looking at that.
I'm looking forward to a new batch of spam emails from a million different campaigns. I like to switch it up every few years.
All right, David. Always good to have you. Thank you for joining us today, and I appreciate your columns at The Federalist. Everybody should bookmark your bylines so that they catch every single one of your brilliant observations.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. Thank you.
Yes, I should hope the check is in the mail like last time. That is David Harsanyi from The Federalist, and there's more to come tonight on O'Connor Tonight.